Zimbabwe dollar. In fact, my question is, should the Zimbabwe dollar return? Should we get our currency back? But not with this government. So I'm saying this government is not the right, they are not the right people to bring back the Zimbabwe dollar, because they are the same people that saw the deterioration of the Zimbabwe dollar since 1980. I mean, in 1980, the Zimbabwe dollar was 1:1 with the British pound. In fact, some people say it was a little bit stronger than the British pound. But I think we'd also need to think about exactly how the Zimbabwe dollar came to be the Zimbabwe dollar. Okay, so first of all, we had the Rhodesian dollar, and the Rhodesian dollar was printed by the Rhodesian government, which was the government before 1980. They printed the Rhodesian dollar because they had declared independence from Britain, and they had been using the Rhodesian pound up to that point, I think around 1977, 78, I'm not sure about the year, but they changed and they started printing the Rhodesian dollar. Now what we did as Zimbabweans in 1980 was just to take that Rhodesian dollar and print the Zimbabwe dollar. So it was like a 1:1, I think that's what happened. But I'm interested to know just how much of that money they printed. I'm told that there was a gradual phase out of the Rhodesian dollars into Zimbabwean dollars, so they did not print all the currency, all the denominations straight away. I think as money was being deposited into bank accounts, that's when they were releasing more of the Zimbabwe dollar. But the Zimbabwe dollar then saw a rapid, first gradual, then rapid deterioration up to the year 2008, 2009, when we decided to adopt the United States dollar. So that's what we've been using. And then recently, Governor Mangudla decided to introduce bond notes and bond coins, which are on an Afreximbank loan facility of $200 million. Now, I think people who are more versed in that area can explain exactly how that works. But as far as I know, money is a debt instrument. So money itself is debt. So if we don't have our own currency, we are part of the monetary policy of the country whose currency we're using. In fact, we're using a basket of currencies. So that means that we are under the jurisdiction or the monetary policies of those countries whose monies we're using. So it's a debt instrument. Money is. We owe Afreximbank $200 million bond facility. Now, Dr. Mangudla, who is the governor of the Reserve Bank, should really be running a monetary policy. But without a currency, one wonders exactly what his job is at the moment, because we are under the jurisdiction of Janet Yellen, who is the reserve, who is the Federal Reserve person in charge of monetary policy. Now, Patrick Chinamasa for Zimbabwe is in charge of economic policy. But economic policy without a monetary policy is a little bit difficult thing to work out, because we are making a budget based on a currency we expect to be there tomorrow or next year. If the Americans wake up and decide to get rid of their US dollars, where do we go from there? So if we have a sound economic policy which is supported by a sound monetary policy, then we expect to be able to stimulate economic growth and development, provided that the drivers for economic growth and development are in place. And that includes a skilled workforce and capital. And obviously, we need to create our own capital as well. So if we have economic growth and development, then our standard of living of the people of the middle class will go up, like what is happening in China. More and more people can afford cars now because they are expanding their middle class. When at the same time we have decimated our middle class, it's gone. We now have a chasm between the very, very, very rich and the poor. So the middle class, maybe a few of them, maybe 1% of them, have gone into the top bracket, but the rest have gone into the poor bracket. Okay, so a middle class which is well looked after, which can afford to buy stuff, is good for business and for industry and for entrepreneurship, because they support industry by buying the products which are made by industry. They support business because they can afford public goods and services. They can afford to buy goods and services, and they also support entrepreneurship because they are able to support the innovation of the entrepreneurs of the country. And also, if we can support business, it means business and industry, it means that they can become successful and be able to export some produce, some products, even services. And if they can export, then we can get foreign currency. And foreign currency allows us to buy machinery and to pay off our foreign debt. So there is advantages to the return of the Zimbabwe dollar, but I think what we need is either for the government to set up some kind of a committee, an economic committee, which draws from the talents in the country and takes people not based on their political affiliation, but on their expertise, and then just encourage debate like this one we're having now. So I'm inviting questions and some answers. If you've got answers to some of the questions I'm asking here, then maybe you can also help. So, for example, do you think the Zimbabwe dollar should return? I think it should, and I don't think it should return under the current government or the current conditions. I think we need to come up with a team which comprises the best talents in the country, which can look into how we can revive the economy, because obviously the current government has failed. So we need a plan B. So once we get foreign currency in, then we can afford to pay off our debt. And once we've paid off that debt, I think we need to stop borrowing and think about how we can create our own capital. Because once we've paid off and then we start borrowing, because right now we cannot borrow because we've been the IMF has decided not to give us any more monies until we have paid off what we owe. But as soon as we pay off what we owe, if we start borrowing again, we're just going to be back to the same situation. So I would suggest that we stop borrowing and we think of ways to create our own capital. The goats crisis actually gave some of us ideas of how we can actually bring some of our debt capital into the mainstream economy. For example, some of us consider that goats are debt capital in the case that, one, we don't know how many goats we've got, and number two, we don't know how much they are worth. We don't know how much the goats that we have are worth. And if someone buys a goat in the rural areas, neighbors sell each other goats, those transactions do not form part of our economy. That money is not circulating as it should, because these people are just trading locally. The government cannot collect taxes from that transaction. Whereas if that transaction was recorded, then the government can benefit from collecting taxes from that transaction. So this is how the Western nations are beating us at the taxation game, because these guys will tax anything. They'll tax everything, and they've got a record of every economic transaction that's taken place, save for one or two, very rare, that you can actually do a lot of transactions without going through the proper channels, and which allow you to pay taxes. Because this is what our problem is. We have transactions which are taking place in rural areas. Even those people who are selling tomatoes by the roadside, they might be maybe where they go to buy their tomatoes for resale. There might be some taxation there, but on the roadside, that taxation is gone. They are no longer paying tax on that. Whereas in the West, every transaction, the government is collecting some form of tax, a certain amount of tax for every transaction. Okay, so those are the things to think about as we talk about the possible return of the Zimbabwe dollar. What is your opinion on this? Do you think the Zimbabwe dollar should return or not?